this new administration has made done so much damage and so much destruction. It's kind of breathtaking it could happen that soon. They're shooting first and aiming later. And as a result, the result is a lot of needless pain and sleepless nights. Republicans, where these guys are willing to hurt the middle class and the working class in order to deliver significant greater wealth to the already very wealthy.
Former President Joe Biden making his first major speech post-presidential, and he went after Trump a little bit there and his billionaire cabinet secretaries for targeting Social Security and Medicaid to pay for their upcoming tax cut for the wealthy. This comes as Elon Musk, who, by the way, is an unelected billionaire delegated with special powers, he is gutting the federal workforce and taking money from agencies appropriated by Congress. This is where I remind you that while Republicans claim that Trump has a mandate to shake things up, it is Congress and not the president that has the power of the purse. That's in the Constitution. Republicans who are duly elected members of Congress have just willingly given up that power. And that's a dramatic reversal from just a year ago when it was something that they fiercely defended. Joining me now is former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, who served as Social Security Administrator in the Biden administration. Governor, you introduced the former president at the conference that he was at where he gave this speech. He received, there was an award given out tonight. Talk to me a little bit about just the assault on Social Security, the trampling on the separation of powers, and frankly, your take on President Biden's speech. I didn't get a chance to watch the whole thing, but, you know, folks have called it subdued. He didn't name Trump by name. He didn't name Howard Lutnick by name either. And I mean, given everything that's happening, maybe he could have been a little more punchy, but you were in the room. You tell us what you thought.
Yeah, I don't know. I think everybody knew who he was talking about. I mean, it's only one crew that's been going after Social Security with a chainsaw, gutting the agency. And I suppose Joe Biden is old school, and I think he probably didn't want to flatter these guys for what they're doing by naming names, but everybody knew what he was saying. I think there's going to be Democrats all across the country, not just Democrats, Republicans, independents, Democrats, that are glad a former president speaking up and saying, hey, hands off Social Security. So the group of people that he spoke to was a newly formed group of advocates, counselors, and representatives of people who are disabled. So these are the people that are seeing very clearly and very in very stark terms just how Social Security is being dismantled and torn apart, and the American people are feeling the pain. So I'm glad the president came out today. It was great to see him. He was doing very well, and I think he really relished being back in the fight and being able to call out this horrible breaking and entering into Social Security of Elon Musk and company.
You know, today, Democrats led by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries launched what they are calling a Social Security Day of Action to protest these DOGE cuts to Social Security. And you've got that happening, and then there are town halls happening across the country. I want to play a little more from Chuck Grassley's town hall in literally a very red place in Iowa. Take a listen.
We would like to know what you, as the people, the Congress, who are supposed to rein in this dictator, what are you going to do about it?
Do you hold any concern that Congress will be the next branch that Trump comes for because he is coming for the dictator?
Your job is to represent all of them. And I'm getting sick and tired of it. Because, like I said, to me, I'm like, I hear zero, as they say in the military, or nothing.
Social Security was also a big topic at this town hall. A woman there asked that the senator not call it an entitlement, but an earned benefit. And then Senator Grassley even said that he pledged not to cut Social Security. He also committed to not touching Medicaid, but the facts feel like that's just, he can't promise that because of the budget resolution that we've seen.
Right.
It seems to me that the American people are paying attention. And if they raise their voices about what's happening with Social Security, the potential of what's going to happen at Medicaid, with Medicare and Medicaid, that they can do something about it. Do you feel that?
Oh, I absolutely do. You know, Sanders, I sense that the democracy has woken up to the fact that they're actually coming after your Social Security. There was a time when we said, oh, they'll never reverse Roe v. Wade. Oh, they won't touch that. And then I think there are a lot of people that are still telling themselves that they'll never touch Social Security, but the democracy's woken up. Look, I was in Florida. I did a number of town halls over the course of a couple weekends, and most of them were filled to the rafters with people very, very concerned. They see what's happening. I'll be in Oklahoma City Thursday for a large town hall. I will be in Birmingham shortly for a large town hall. So the democracy's woken up. These guys are coming for your Social Security, and the only thing that's going to save it is for the people to rise up, speak up, call all their congresspeople and senators.
All right. Former Governor Martin O'Malley, thank you. And thank you at home, folks. That's all for this hour. I'm Simone Sanders Townsend. I'll be back tomorrow at 7. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
It's a moment where all of us are required to step up, even given some risks. I will say that I have been working through the U.S. Embassy, and I want to thank them for their cooperation in helping set up this visit. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to have the meetings that I've requested. And of course, I hope to be able to see Kilmar personally. But most of all, this is going to be a message to the president of El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, that this will not go away until he is released. I may be the first senator, member of Congress to go there, but there will be more until justice is done.
I want to offer to you two different sort of arguments or points.
Got one more, Antoine.
With USPS Ground Advantage, it's like you're with us every step of the way.
An elected representative of the people of Minnesota, someone who talks to people and tries to sort of, communicate.
Yeah. Well, you want to be a calming presence. Look, I've done this through a global pandemic. I did it through the unrest of George Floyd, and you want to convey factual information, and you want to normalize. Your first segment couldn't have been more spot on. I've been using, and I made this statement at one time, the road to authoritarianism is littered with people telling you you're overreacting. I have had hair on fire for a while, and I know those, we can't swing at everything. He's just out there flooding the zone.
Reaction to him raising alarms, and I'm just going to read from your piece here. That his attempts to raise concerns internally within the NLRB preceded someone physically taping a threatening note to his door that included sensitive personal information, and this is wild.
Bent finger appointment in 30 minutes.
You got this. 1, remember, I don't want surgery for my Dupuytren's contracture. 2, I don't want to wait for my contracture to get worse. 3, I want a treatment with minimal downtime. 4, I want a non-surgical treatment. And 5,
and if non-surgical treatment isn't offered,
I'll get a second opinion. Let's go.
Take charge of your treatment. If you can't lay your hand flat, visit findahandspecialist.com to get started.
There's no way I'd be able to support this building or any of my employees without TikTok.
Good evening, Chris. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated.
You bet.
And thanks to you at home for joining us here this hour. Really happy to have you here. So Harvard is standing up and fighting against Trump's threats and attacks against universities. They are fighting instead of making concessions and giving in. Today, yet another law firm that Trump targeted has won against him in court. This time it was the firm Sussman Godfrey. The judge called what Trump is doing in threatening this firm, quote, a shocking abuse of power. The judge blocked Trump from essentially continuing to go after the firm. Not to state the obvious or anything, but that firm won that ruling because they chose to fight him instead of making concessions to him and giving in. In fact, every law firm that has fought Trump's attacks in court thus far has won. And that makes it really embarrassing to be one of the law firms that chose not to fight him, right? I mean, you didn't have to give in. You would have won in court if you'd fought it, but you gave in anyway. Bad call, right? Why would anyone hire you to fight for them on anything ever? Save yourself, save your firm, get out of your so-called deal with Trump and fight back. Because, hey, look, everybody who's fighting back is winning. Whereas in the meantime, you've destroyed your law firm's reputation for eternity. Again, until you change your mind. Today, also, the federal judge hearing the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia told the Trump administration that they do not have the option to disobey the court's order to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to the United States. We will have more on that in a moment. It was a very dramatic confrontation in court today. Tonight, we've got tens of thousands of people turning out right now on a Tuesday to see Senator Bernie Sanders and Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in two back-to-back anti-Trump rallies they are holding in Bakersfield and then in Folsom, California today. Tens of thousands of people turning out for these two events. Again, these guys turned out 56,000 people over 2 nights in LA and Salt Lake City just this weekend. Now they are tearing up basically Central California as we speak. I mean, all this stuff happening on one day. It's on. It is absolutely on. And we're going to have more on all of those stories over the course of the hour tonight. So, like I said, I'm very, very happy that you're here. It's a big show, especially for Tuesday. It feels like a big show. It feels like a Friday already. But we're gonna start tonight with something that is quite different. We're starting tonight with a whistleblower story, and a whistleblower who is here tonight live along with his attorney. And let me tell you a little bit why we are starting with this story. So we've been focusing a lot on the way that people are standing up to try to block what Trump is doing, to try to show that they disagree with Trump, to show show their resistance to what he's trying to do. And I think that's the real story in the country. But because we've been really focusing on that, we sometimes don't get into the nitty-gritty of the sort of strategy of what Trump is doing. And tonight's one of those nights that we're going to look at it a little bit. Because it turns out, when you are in the middle of an attempted authoritarian takeover of your country, one of the things that happens is that the actions of the government get very opaque. It gets harder to figure out what they're doing. In contrast with a normal, small d democratic administration, when you're in the midst of a would-be authoritarian takeover, official pronouncements from the government, like from White House spokespeople, they just become bombastic propaganda with no factual content that you can't rely on for the truth of what's being asserted. They ignore public records requests wholesale. They, for example, have fired all the people who are responsible for handling public communications in a professional way. They've even fired the people who are responsible for handling FOIA requests. And of course, it is a hallmark of authoritarian governance that you can't allow a free press, right? That extends in our time, in our experience, to everything from Trump's bombastic threats to try to intimidate news organizations and individual reporters from being critical of him or asking hard questions of him. It extends from that to using the various powers of the government to take away broadcast licenses or to damage the sources of funding for news organizations. And of course, it applies to him and his allies trying to sue various news organizations into oblivion. As of yesterday, it would also seem to appear to include the administration defying a direct court order that they have to allow the Associated Press back into the White House press pool. They have been ordered to do that, and they are not doing it. It is central to authoritarian governance that the press must be shut down, beaten up, or cowed so that the public doesn't learn what the government is doing in any kind of reliable and ongoing way. I mean, again, to state the obvious, authoritarian governments do not exist to do what's best for the people. So they find that it's best that the people don't find out all that much about what they're up to. Therefore, the free press has to go. And in our case, in our experience, in this time that we are living through, one other way they've been able to hide or obscure a lot of what the government is doing is by doing so much of their work through this DOGE thing, through this bizarre, semi-secret, semi-governmental operation that is both led by the president's top campaign donor, Elon Musk, and officially not led by Elon Musk at all. The ostensible purpose of this very opaque, very mysterious DOGE organization is to cut spending from the government, right? I mean, it's clear that that is not what they're doing, but that is how they have described the purpose of the organization. Elon Musk, the president's top campaign donor, said that at DOGE he would cut $1 trillion out of the government's budget. Then he said he would cut $2 trillion out of the government's budget. Then, as of last week, he said at an all-for-the-cameras cabinet meeting that it would actually be about 92% less than that. It would be about $150 billion by next fiscal year that he and DOGE were going to cut. After that, the New York Times and other entities, other news organizations pointed out that DOGE's accounting of that relatively tiny amount, that $150 billion, was itself riddled with errors. And there was no way that what they were claiming to have saved added up to anywhere near $150 billion. And then after that, they took down the government website that lists what the government is actually funding and cutting. And now they're being sued for taking that down. So the claims that DOGE is all about cutting wasteful spending, cutting trillions of dollars out of government, those clearly aren't true. So what's DOGE doing? If it's not cutting trillions of dollars out of the government, and it's really not, then what exactly is this very opaque and mysterious part of the government up to? What is DOGE up to? What is it for? Well, as always, it is most helpful to watch what they do and not what they say. And from the actions that we can observe of what DOGE is doing, there's nothing about what they're doing that looks like government efficiency, right? So I think we can sort of set aside the pretext. We can set aside their claims about what they're doing, at least what they're trying to do. What are they really doing? What can we see about their activity to show us what they're doing and why? There are a few different sort of buckets that we can see in terms of what DOGE is doing. And I would say the first bucket is them just breaking stuff, right? The Social Security Administration broken. So they no longer answer the phone, their website doesn't work, their field offices are totally overrun and non-functional, breaking Social Security agency. The IRS, they're doing the same, just breaking the agency. Today's April 15th, today's tax day. We'll see how well this tax season works out. Same with student loans. They shut down the Education Department and its handling of federal student loans. They moved student loans randomly to the Small Business Administration, which is not at all equipped to handle it. Now nobody's answering the phones or the email, and the websites don't work on student loans. Nobody knows what's happening to their student loans. So that's one sort of category of what we can see them doing. That's bucket one, right? They are breaking stuff. Bucket two, they are slashing stuff out of the government that they appear to not even understand.
You propose more than $11 billion in cuts to local and state programs addressing things like infectious disease, mental health, addiction, and childhood vaccination. Did you personally approve those cuts?
No, I'm not familiar with those cuts. We'd have to go. We'd have to go.
There's like more than 50 pages of, of cuts that I actually went through.
The cuts were mainly DEI cuts, which the president
There were a lot, but I'll give you, for example, about $750,000 of a University of Michigan grant into adolescent diabetes was cut. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, and that's something that we'll look at.
I didn't know that. We cut what? We cut what? I mean, you didn't cut that. Who cut it? Oh, was that DOGE? Part of what DOGE appears to be doing is cuts that nobody has asked for and nobody can defend. I mean, here's Kennedy at HHS saying, woo, we cut adolescent diabetes research? That sounds terrible. That doesn't sound like something I'd do. I better look into that. Yeah, my dude, that's supposedly something you did. I did? What? Better look into that. I mean, the same goes with the cuts to, now famously, Ebola response and prevention. Oops, we didn't mean to cut that. And the people who handle our nuclear weapons. Oops, didn't mean to cut that. I mean, same goes presumably with the cuts to the firefighters' cancer registry, which Donald Trump himself created. That just got cut. Did Donald Trump want to cut that? Who knows? These cuts, they just, I don't know, they sort of make themselves. So there's them breaking stuff. There's them cutting stuff that they don't even appear to know they are cutting. The third bucket, I think, is stuff they do mean to cut, and they're quite gleeful about it. Things like, you know, HIV prevention. They're delighted to cut that. Libraries, museums, the part of the National Highway Transportation Safety Board that oversees the self-driving cars at Elon Musk's Tesla company. Yeah, they're delighted to get rid of all that sort of stuff. So these are just all the things that we can observe, right? We can observe them smashing stuff up so it doesn't work, cutting stuff that they don't understand and that maybe isn't even on purpose. We do see them cutting stuff on purpose as well. But now we're getting to what I think of as the really heavy part of it, the really heavy part of this authoritarian project. Because some of the stuff that they have been doing that has seemed inexplicable is starting to become explicable, is starting to become understandable. Because part of what we are now seeing, this many weeks into this administration, is that when it has appeared that they're just messing with various agencies or trying to access various data systems within agencies, it's not a pointless rummaging that they are doing there. It's not just rummaging around in there and flipping switches and seeing what breaks. Part of what is now emerging is that they've been in these government systems because they're trying to use the government to hurt people as much as they can. So, for example, it turns out they were messing with all the information on international students in a government database so they could target individual international students to snatch them off the street and arrest them and throw them in immigration prisons. It turns out they were messing with sensitive systems inside the IRS and the Treasury, at least in part, so they could use that data to go after immigrants as well. Turns out they were messing with sensitive systems inside the Social Security Administration because they have taught themselves that one way you can really destroy people's lives in this country is if you take the names of living people and declare them dead inside the Social Security Administration. And now on top of that, today, something new. As we have been watching the actions of this government, and particularly the opaque, hard-to-parse actions of this DOGE entity that has been set up under the auspices of the president's top campaign donor, and none of us are allowed to know what they're doing, as we've been trying to figure out what they're actually doing and why, we've now got a brand new set of allegations that we've never encountered before. And if these allegations are true, they suggest an apparently sort of a new sort of bucket, a new type of behavior from these guys that we are only learning about today, thanks to a whistleblower in IT who has the technical skills to actually see what they're doing and who has now come forward to Congress and to the Office of Special Counsel, which protects whistleblowers. He has come forward to explain something else that he believes these guys are doing that we didn't know before. And if he is right, it would seem to explain yet more about what previously seemed inexplicable. What he's describing is also something that seems very, very bad and very dangerous for our country. All right, so here's the story. NPR was first to break this story today. Reporter Jenna McLaughlin publishing a more than 7,000-word piece citing more than 30 sources. But the core of the story is based on a whistleblower disclosure from an IT staffer at the National Labor Relations Board named Daniel Baroulis. And last month, Mr. Baroulis says that DOGE staffers arrived at the headquarters of the National Labor Relations Board. He can't be positive they were from DOGE, but whoever they were, he says they accessed National Labor Relations Board data systems for about a week. And then they deleted the accounts they had created in order to work in those systems. So they got in for about a week, and then they deleted the accounts they had created to work inside those systems. Now, what's in those systems? Well, National Labor Relations Board has a lot of internal data that's really sensitive. The point of that agency is they adjudicate labor complaints at various companies. So their internal systems include a lot of really sensitive proprietary data about U.S. companies and about their employees and about unions and about whistleblowers. It includes really sensitive stuff like witness testimony and legal information about ongoing cases. According to Mr. Baroulis' disclosure, he believes DOGE staffers took steps to make sure that whatever they did while they were inside the systems at the agency was not logged. So in the internal data systems of the agency, there were no traceable records of what they did inside the system because they configured their access to the system in ways that they could either manually or automatically remove traces of what they had done. But while they were in there, Mr. Baroulis says there was a large exfiltration of data. A large exfiltration of data, almost all text files. And when I say it was a large exfiltration, to give you a sense of how unusual this was for the agency, this screenshot from Mr. Baroulis's disclosure shows that large spike in outbound traffic leaving the agency and how unusual it was compared to normal activity on their systems. He says the logs that should have shown what that was just attributed that large exfiltration of data to a deleted account. And he says the location where the data went had been obscured. There was no listing as to where the data went. Mr. Baroulis then found that while these people were inside the system, this is worrying, they had disabled the core security systems that keep the agency's systems and data secure and private. Quoting from NPR, someone had disabled controls that would prevent insecure or unauthorized mobile devices from logging onto the system without the proper security settings. There was an interface exposed to the public internet, potentially allowing malicious actors access to the NLRB's systems. Internal alerting and monitoring systems were found to be manually turned off, and multi-factor authentication was disabled. Now, why would these guys disable all the security on the system at this agency and then leave it that way when they got out? I don't know, and neither do you. But this is also from Mr. Baroulis's whistleblower disclosure. Quote, I noticed increased logins blocked by our access policy due to those logins being out of the country. For example, in the days after DOGE accessed NLRB's systems, we noticed a user with an IP address in Russia started trying to log in. Those attempts were blocked, but they were especially alarming. Whoever was attempting to log in was using one of the newly created accounts that were used in the other DOGE-related activities. It appeared they had the correct username and password. Now, these attempted logins from Russia were only stopped, quote, due to our no out-of-country logins policy. But there were more than 20 such attempts. And what is particularly concerning is that many of these login attempts occurred within 15 minutes of those accounts being created by DOGE engineers. So, I mean, the allegations here, to sum them up, kind of go like this. Now, NBC News has not independently verified these allegations. This is simply what has been described in a whistleblower's disclosure from Mr. Baroulis. But what he is saying is this. According to what he can tell, they get in, they structure their access once they're in there so nobody can see what they're doing while they're in there. While they are in there, lots of data from this very sensitive agency gets taken to parts unknown. Then they leave all the doors unlocked and all the alarms off, and then immediately someone with an IP address in Russia starts logging into the system using one of the DOGE accounts with what appears to be a working username and password. And then there's one last piece of this. Mr. Baroulis says that within the agency, they saw enough to convene a formal review of what they perceived to be a serious breach, a theft of the agency's sensitive data. They started their formal review. They prepared a request to CISA, the cybersecurity agency at Homeland Security, to help them investigate. As that process of requesting help from CISA was underway, Mr. Baroulis got a personal threat. Quote, in the days after Baroulis and his colleagues prepared a request for CISA's help investigating the breach, Baroulis found a printed letter in an envelope taped to his door, which included threatening language, sensitive personal information, and overhead pictures of him walking his dog. It is unclear who sent it, but the letter made specific reference to his decision to report the breach. Law enforcement is investigating the letter. In a letter to the House and Senate committees who had oversight over NLRB, the agency here, Mr. Baroulis' lawyer, who's from the nonprofit group Whistleblower Aid, he tells the chairs and the ranking members of those committees, quote, The threatening note made clear reference to this very disclosure Mr. Baroulis was preparing for you as the proper oversight authority. While we do not know specifically who did this, we can only speculate that it involves someone with the ability to access NLRB systems. This meat space action, meaning real life, this meat space action where a threat was physically delivered to my client's home, is absolutely disturbing in its manner and the implications suggested therein. Accordingly, we have been and will continue to be coordinating with appropriate law enforcement agencies. Given the aforementioned, we request that both law enforcement agencies and Congress initiate an immediate investigation into the cybersecurity breach and data exfiltration at NLRB and any other agencies where DOGE has accessed internal systems. Now, we tried to get comment tonight from the White House and from NLRB, in addition to requests by NBC News for comment from NLRB and Elon Musk. There was a statement to NPR from an NLRB spokesperson in which the spokesperson denied that NLRB granted DOGE access to its systems. They said DOGE had not requested access to the agency's systems. They said an internal investigation conducted after Mr. Baroulis raised his concerns, quote, determined that no breach of agency systems occurred. But the whistleblower himself and his attorney are going to join us here live next. Stay with us.
Asthma. Does it have you missing out on what you love with who you love? Get back to better breathing with Fasenra, an add-on treatment for eosinophilic asthma taken once every 8 weeks. Fasenra is not for sudden breathing problems. Serious allergic reactions may occur. Get help for swelling of your face, mouth, tongue, or trouble breathing. Don't stop your asthma treatments without talking with your doctor. Tell your doctor if your asthma worsens or you have a parasitic infection. Headache and sore throat may occur. Ask your doctor if Fasenra is right for you.
Lumify?
It's kind of amazing.
Wow. Lumify eye drops dramatic.
Profit group whistleblower aid about a whistleblower who's just come forward named Daniel Baroulis. Quote, Mr. Baroulis is coming forward today because of his concern that recent activity by members of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, have resulted in a significant cybersecurity breach that likely has and continues to expose our government to foreign intelligence and our nation's adversaries. This declaration details DOGE activity within the National Labor Relations Board, the exfiltration of data from NLRB systems, and concerningly, near real-time access by users in Russia. Notably, within minutes of DOGE personnel creating user accounts in NLRB systems, on multiple occasions, someone or something within Russia attempted to log in using all of the valid credentials, usernames and passwords. This, combined with verifiable data being systematically exfiltrated to unknown servers within the United States and perhaps abroad, merits investigation. Joining us now is NLRB whistleblower Daniel Baroulis and his attorney, Andrew Buckeye. Mr. Baroulis, Mr. Buckeye, I really appreciate you being here. I'm sure this is a stressful time for both of you and a stressful experience being on national TV talking about it. I really appreciate your trust to do this.
Thank you for having us on.
So, Mr. Baroulis, let me ask you about some of the pushback that we've had here. NLRB said in a statement that DOGE didn't access National Labor Relations Board data. They said that DOGE never had access specifically even to the building in which National Labor Relations Board is housed. What's your response to that statement from the agency? We're having a hard time sort of making heads or tails of it.
I totally get that. I think it's an initial knee-jerk reaction. The truth is it was almost immediate after they got notice of this. There's not going to be corroborating evidence like I presented that they're going to be able to present to back up these. What I did is I tried to prove the negatives along the way, and I compartmentalized the investigation. So as part of this, I definitely was careful to not say anything that wasn't true or include anything that I couldn't back up with secondary sources. And so I think if we can get the right people in here for transparency, I would absolutely love it if I was wrong about this. It's just we need other people we need real forensic analysis, and that's what we were trying to do with the cert. And that goes back to what we requested, which is an independent investigation, because again, Dan provided not only what he saw, but the forensic details to back up his concerns. And so part and parcel of an investigation is to, of course, speak to others, and there will be other individuals who will be able to corroborate what Dan saw, because they saw them themselves.
In terms of what you witnessed, you presented this screenshot showing what appears to be a large surge in data leaving the agency. For people who aren't familiar with what the NLRB does and what kind of data that might be, what is the sensitivity of the kinds of data that's housed in NLRB systems? What worries you about that potentially being exfiltrated to parts unknown?
Sure, absolutely. So what we're looking at there in the picture is the outgoing data out of from our internal network. There's also a correlating spike in the outgoing data from the database that houses our internal case data. So things like proprietary company secrets, union organizer names, private affidavits of unfair labor practice complainants. These are things that traditionally would be kept in a judicial system behind lock and key. And not anything to do with efficiency, for sure.
Why would the security systems that protect the secrecy and the sort of sanctity of that data ever be disabled? Is there a sort of good faith reason that somebody would allow insecure mobile devices to access that data or remove multi-factor authentication for people who are trying to access those data? Those security systems being disabled within NLRB's systems, to me, just seem completely inexplicable. At least they don't seem like the sort of thing that could be done in a good faith sort of way. But am I missing something? Is that something that IT professionals do for other reasons?
No, you're absolutely correct. They're considered indicators of compromise. And the people that I work with are very meticulous. They're borderline OCD, and these aren't mistakes that I've ever seen them make before. So for all these controls to be off, in this small amount of time, it doesn't speak to being accidental.
Once you and your colleagues decided, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Bukele.
No, and one of the things I also want to point out to you, because you did an outstanding job, Rachel, in going over exactly how foreign intelligence likely was able to try and access NLRB databases. This is more than just the NLRB. Dan is here because he's been brave enough to come forward with what he saw, what he witnessed, what he can actually establish through forensic data. We have heard from others there are many people like Dan, but who are afraid to come forward. And we've also heard that in addition to how the systems were being treated by DOGE within NLRB, what we've also seen is that these systems were also connected to Starlink. Now, why is Starlink critical? Starlink is critical because the information that flows through Starlink goes directly to Russia. What has happened was back in last year, the Department of Defense has stopped using Starlink in any way, shape, or form because that is viewed as a direct pipeline there. And this is something that is also being seen in other agencies, not just NLRB. The other thing that's really concerning is that, and I don't want to say that this was done intentionally, it could be done unintentionally by accident by those who are working within DOGE, which is they have allowed certain specific critical infrastructure in other agencies, such as within the Department of Energy, where you have nuclear regulatory agencies overseeing our nuclear stockpile, et cetera, where that has been now opened to the open internet. So critical infrastructure throughout the country has unfortunately been provided access to the open internet, which means our foreign adversaries like Russia can and may have access to all of that. So the way that I would frame this is that what Dan is seeing and what others like Dan are seeing within our government is that this is like Chernobyl and them seeing the control systems light up post-meltdown. This is where we are.
Let me be clear on the issue of foreign access to NLRB systems. What you saw, Dan, is a Russian IP address. So you can spoof an IP address. It could be somebody pretending to be in Russia and not actually being there. Attempting to log into these systems in very close proximity to the time that DOGE was creating, DOGE, as you say, was creating accounts in order to access these systems. But there's no proof of who that was or if, in fact, that was, a foreign intelligence service or even a foreign actor, right? It was just a Russian IP address, right?
So there are some caveats, but to the effect, yes, it was the same geolocation multiple times, and it's just one of the small factors that adds up to the bigger picture. You have one of these, you consider it maybe a fluke, but you have 40 or 50 of these indicators, and the bigger picture becomes clear.
Let me ask you about the threat that you received, Dan. You and your colleagues at NLRB had decided to pursue a formal investigation into what you regarded as a breach of the data and systems at your agency. You prepared a request to CISA at the Department of Homeland Security to help you with that investigation. And then you received a threat at your home where you live?
Where I hadn't lived for too long either. I've only been there 2 months. The only place that I've actually updated that address is in the OPM database for my payroll with the government. That's really, I haven't even updated my bank card yet. So
can you tell us about the character of the threat?
I think it was vague enough to not be. Can I just?
Yeah, I can jump in there for Dan because this is actually quite difficult for him to talk about because it is quite personal. So this is a letter who somebody had drafted. And within the letter, there was specific information about Dan that can only be obtained through, for example, internal databases within the government. Because it's not anything, and we've had individuals conduct an investigation. We've had our own investigative team conduct an investigation to see whether or not any of this is really easily accessible online, and it's not. And so there is information that very few individuals would know. It could be something that was submitted to the government on an SF-86, a security clearance background investigation, et cetera. And the fact that he's only been at this residence for 2 months or less. We have that. We have the fact that somebody literally figured out where he lives, taped this note to his door, and flew a drone above him while he was walking his dog. I mean, I've only seen this once or twice in the years where I've represented whistleblowers or conducted investigations like this. When I saw this, this made me pause and get concerned about Dan and what's going on. And this is pure and simple witness and whistleblower intimidation because this came forward before we even filed anything with the government, which means that somebody was monitoring his use of systems within the government, which for me is, is an indicator as to where this is coming from. And the funny thing is that this was clearly done to intimidate him, to stop him from coming forward, but it didn't. And the reason why Dan came forward is not just to ensure that the truth comes out, but that other folks like him have the courage to come forward, because a lot of people believe or think that something is amiss, that this is happening within our agencies, within our government. But guess what? It is. And we have the evidence to establish that. And we need other people to come forward because you know what? And one of my colleagues has said this once in the past, and it's so true. Courage is contagious. And this is in part why Dan is here and speaking with you today, not behind a silhouette or a screen, but directly to you today and to everybody, so that way we can hear what's actually happening.
Yeah, I agree. It's really to the point of where I feel like there's a culture of fear in the government right now that we're trying to combat. And by coming forward and standing up, even with this happening, I feel like fear and apathy are the death of democracy. And we can kind of, fight that if somebody's able to just show that they can do this and it's okay. I have plenty of other friends at other agencies that are terrified right now to come forward with what they have. And my hope is that they see this and they're able to do that now.
One of the things that Dan has told me is that he hopes that he's wrong.
Absolutely.
This is not something that we want to be the case, but we've been able to stress test this not just through Dan's own research and investigation, but through subject matter experts with whom we've worked in preparing this disclosure. And so what we're asking for is an investigation, somebody to look at this and take this seriously. Because you know what? There's personal identifiable information affecting American citizens that's flying out from the United States government, likely to Russia. But if that's not enough, then it's our national security. I mean, at some point, we all have to collectively wake up and say no and rebuild. Because unfortunately, I'm concerned that we're in a place where we can't undo what has been done, but we can know what happened, who did something wrong, hold people accountable, even if it's, at some point in time in the future, and rebuild, because that's where we need to be.
And again, the request here is for an independent investigation by law enforcement and Congress. National Labor Relations Board whistleblower Daniel Baroulis and attorney Andrew Bukai. Mr. Baroulis, as I said at the outset, I know this is a very stressful time, and this is a stressful thing, including being on television with me right now. I thank you for your trust in doing it. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you both for helping us understand.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your coverage.
All right.
Yes.
All right. More news ahead here tonight. Stay with us. Exactly 1 month ago, the Trump administration abducted and imprisoned a Maryland man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They flew him and hundreds of other men to a prison in El Salvador. The government has since called imprisoning Mr. Abrego Garcia, at least, a mistake. 5 days ago, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous 9-0 decision, ordered the Trump administration that they needed to bring him back. They needed to, quote, facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return to the U.S. Well, they haven't done so yet. And today in court, a federal judge in Maryland just excoriated Trump administration lawyers over the administration's refusal to comply with that order, the administration's refusal to go get Mr. Abrego Garcia, or at least prove that they're trying to. The judge, quote, just so everyone knows where my current thinking is, Mr. Abrego Garcia has already won his injunctive relief. It was affirmed not only by the Fourth Circuit, but by the Supreme Court. We're here today to talk about the scope of the remedy, which means that while expeditiousness is of the utmost importance, because it is a fact now of this record that every day Mr. Abrego Garcia is detained in the prison in El Salvador, that is a day of further irreparable harm. At the same time, if not this court, then who to engage in process? It's process that is in the roots of our Constitution. So we have to give process to both sides, but we're going to move. There will be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding. We will talk about the contours of this, but that's where I am right now. At one point, the Trump administration lawyer argued about the meaning of the word facilitate, calling it a term of art within immigration law. The judge said in response, quote, I'm not even sure what you mean, but as a factual matter, I do need evidence in this regard, because to date, what the record shows is that nothing has been done. Nothing. I've asked for daily reports, daily, by individuals with personal knowledge, and I've gotten very little information of any value. Trump administration lawyer. Your Honor, I think what we have submitted reflects that there have been significant steps. In particular, we cited to this issue was raised at the highest possible level. We cited to this issue was raised at the highest possible levels yesterday. It was raised in the Oval Office between two heads of state, between the President of the United States and the President of El Salvador. The issue was specifically discussed. The judge, a reporter asked a question. The defendants have never responded to the question, what steps have you taken? The plaintiff is asking, why don't the defendants just ask, you will release him? I've got no answer on that. And in response to this notion that what happened in the Oval Office is satisfactory, that's not before the court. I mean, you include a transcript. I don't know if what this transcript is supposed to be assisting me in. But the bottom line is, it was a very simple directive. My question that the high court squarely affirmed, I can ask, what have you done? I've gotten nothing. I've got no real response, nor have I gotten any legitimate legal justification for not answering the question. That's why we need to move to the next step. Because in fairness, if you're not going to answer the questions that the plaintiffs put within the scope of my order, then you will justify why. You will cite privilege, you'll follow the rules, I will make a determination. That is what we do in this House. That is the most fair I can be. She said, and I don't consider what happened yesterday, meaning in the Oval Office, as really evidence before this court. Lawyers for Mr. Abrego Garcia then asked the judge to hold the Trump administration in contempt of court over their failure to comply with the court's orders. The judge did not rule out finding them in contempt. She said first she wants to make the Trump administration submit evidence and sit for depositions, and quickly. The Trump administration's lawyer voiced his concerns about scheduling those depositions quickly. He said, quote, Your Honor, I don't know right now their availability. I assume that can be arranged in a 7-day period, but I can't say that conclusively. Whereupon the judge said this, well, cancel vacation. Cancel other appointments. I'm usually pretty good about things like that in my courtroom, but not this time. So I expect all hands on deck. It won't be a convenience issue. That's what I'm saying. I will be flexible if you need to accommodate depositions, whether it's in the courthouse because you have the court available to call balls and strikes as the depositions go on. I'm going to be available. If you need to do it at odd hours or weekends, I'm also available. Trump administration lawyer, we will move expeditiously, Your Honor. The judge, okay, I appreciate that. After today's hearing, that Maryland judge put in writing her order requiring the Trump administration to turn over evidence of its efforts to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return home. The judge spelled out an expedited schedule. She is instructing Abrego Garcia's lawyers to submit their requests for evidence by tomorrow evening. Those requests can pertain to, quote, the current physical location and custodial status of Abrego Garcia, what steps, if any, defendants have taken to facilitate his immediate return to the U.S., and what additional steps the Trump administration will take and when to facilitate his return. The Trump administration must reply to those requests no later than 5 p.m. on Monday. Mr. Abrego Garcia's lawyers may also depose at least 4 members of the Trump administration on this matter by next Wednesday. Joining us now is Rina Gandhi. She's a partner at Murray Osorio Immigration Law Firm. She's one of the attorneys representing Mr. Abrego Garcia in this matter. Ms. Gandhi, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So we got this transcript right before the show started tonight, and we have been sort of going through it and pulling from it as we can. Let me ask you if I missed any important details or mischaracterized anything of what happened at today's hearing.
No, I think that is a very good summary. Those are the highlights that I certainly took away. No, I think that was accurate.
What do you expect to happen next over the course of this next week in terms of what is now a court-ordered but not yet manifest, order to have your client come home?
Well, I do believe that we will be able to get some answers from these very people who wrote these affidavits, providing us not very much before. I think when confronted with very specific questions where they can't just file a report saying we're not required to say anything, will hopefully return results. They can't hide the ball here anymore. You know, and this hearing today really helped us move forward, move towards bringing Mr. Abrego Garcia back home.
Are we now in a situation, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm just observing these things as a lay observer here, but with the Trump administration and the president himself asserting that it is not within the power of the U.S. government to bring your client home, that it's up to El Salvador because they operate the prison where the U.S. is paying to hold him. Is that assertion from the president and from the Trump administration essentially wholly outside these legal proceedings now and sort of beside the point? It seems as if the judge is proceeding on the evidence that's been put forward to the court and not on the basis of these sort of political statements that have been made by the president and others to excuse what the administration isn't doing.
Well, that's precisely right. Before the court, no evidence has been presented. There's no reason, no argument for why they can't at least show what they have done and what they plan to do. Unfortunately, I think it's because the answer is they haven't been planning to do anything. But hopefully with the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to get some real answers.
Rina Gandhi, a partner at Murray Osorio Immigration Law Firm, one of the attorneys representing Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The plight of your client here has captured the mind and the heart of the country in a lot of ways. Most of the people who have heard his name for the first time here will never, ever know him as a person, but what the government has tried to do in his name has absolutely galvanized people to recognize the scale of what this administration's ambitions are toward destruction of human rights and civil rights. Your representation of him is a real service to the country. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.
Can we have a chat about your law?
As we covered at the top of last night's show, Harvard University is the first university in the United States to just flatly and publicly refuse to capitulate to the Trump administration's blitzkrieg against academia. Trump has been threatening to weaponize federal funding against any college or university that won't roll over and let him essentially take over the administration of the school and even its academic curriculum. He's thus far canceled or frozen funding to 6 of the 8 schools in the Ivy League and 1 school in the Big Ten. Columbia was the first school that Trump targeted. Columbia obviously made some concessions and therefore sort of set its fate in motion. But Harvard is just saying no. And that may totally change the dynamic here, not just in terms of whether Harvard actually manages to win their own fight against what Trump's trying to do, but also I think a lot of people are hoping that this might put steel in some other institutions' spines, that they ought to be fighting back too. Now, in terms of the colleges and universities, Trump may have been going after the Ivies first, but him doing that has afforded other colleges the chance to sort of get their act together, to figure out what they're going to do before he inevitably comes for them. And we're seeing the results of some of that right now, interestingly, in the Big Ten. Started at Rutgers in New Jersey in late March. The university's Senate passed a resolution to band together with the other members of the Big Ten against what Trump is doing. The resolution calls for establishing a mutual defense compact, which in part calls for participating institutions to make available at the rest of the institution under direct political infringement the services of their legal counsel, governance experts, and public affairs offices to coordinate a unified and vigorous response. Then we saw the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, their faculty senate, voting to adopt the same resolution. And then so did the faculty council at Indiana University at Bloomington. So that's 3 of the Big Ten schools, which, not to confuse things, but even though they're called the Big Ten, it currently consists of 18 schools. Joining them is UMass Amherst, which is not a Big Ten school, but they're applying that same concept to call for a public and land-grant university mutual academic defense compact. So we've got Harvard leading on their own after almost all the other Ivies were targeted, right? Now we've got the other institutions, the other higher education institutions in the country who know that Trump is coming for them, realizing that you can see it coming, and the way to do it is not to fight on your own, to be prepared and to get organized and to make sure you're not fighting alone. I mean, Fighting Authoritarianism 101 says don't fight alone. Whether you organize, along athletic conferences or academic rivalries or being a bunch of colleges along the same interstate, whatever organizing principle you choose, get together. Do not fight alone and be ready before they come for you. All right, one last note before we go. A guest on our show earlier tonight made a claim about the Defense Department ending its use of Elon Musk's Starlink internet service over concerns that Starlink information passed on Starlink can be viewed by the Russian government. That is an assertion that was made by our guest, but we should note we have not found any evidence that the Defense Department has stopped using Starlink over those types of security concerns. If we learn more, we will tell you more. But that does it for me tonight. I will see you again tomorrow and every night this week at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now it's time for The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. And I know, like me, you've been waiting for at least 24 hours, more than that, to hear what Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe has to say about Donald Trump's burst of lawlessness, including directed toward Harvard University. And your patience is rewarded tonight. He will be joining us on this program. Just going to open the microphone and let him go.
You know, Lawrence, we just covered a story at the end there about some other universities, whether or not they're drafting off of Harvard's bravery here, but some other universities that are taking a better together than alone approach here, and they are banding together in the Big Ten. UMass Amherst is trying to get land-grant colleges to band together so they can eventually provide mutual defense for one another, support one another in standing up for Trump when Trump inevitably comes for those organizations, for those universities as well. There's all different ways to fight this. Harvard is certainly cutting a wake here.
Yeah, and I don't think of it as bravery for Harvard. They're big enough, strong enough, old enough, the oldest university in America, to do it. But the smaller schools could be completely wiped out. And it does take bravery, and it does take a team. It takes this unity that you were describing that I was listening to. It's exactly the way to approach it.
Yeah, band together. Don't fight these. A, fight these things, and B, make sure you don't fight these things alone. We're slow in the uptake, but we're figuring it out.
Yeah, we'll get there. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, in the new Trump era of disgraced Washington law firms that have shamed themselves forever by giving in to Donald Trump's plainly unconstitutional demands on them, there is tonight one Washington law firm that is taking the most boldly defiant possible course of action against Donald Trump. And I have never before considered using the word brave in relation to any high-powered, highly paid Washington law firm. The brave lawyers I've seen in our history have usually been sole practitioners outside of Washington, D.C., or members of much smaller law firms, sometimes little family law firms, taking on the most challenging cases. Gregory Peck won an Oscar for his portrayal of what became an iconic version of the brave lawyer, the Hollywood version of the brave lawyer, has never been a highly paid member of a Washington law firm. Gregory Peck was on his own in To Kill a Mockingbird, the hero of that courtroom. But tonight, the two most important challenges to Donald Trump's reign of constitutional terrorism, what one federal judge has called lawlessness, are being represented by the same law firm. The Washington law firm of Quinn, Emanuel, Urquhart, and Sullivan is representing the man Donald Trump deported to El Salvador, to an El Salvador prison, in a process that even the Trump lawyers at first had to admit was, quote, an administrative error. And that same law firm is defending Harvard University against Donald Trump's flagrant display of constitutional dementia in his attempt to take over Harvard University and, in effect, make himself, Donald Trump, the president of Harvard University, in the same way that he took over the Kennedy Center, and control the admission of students at Harvard University, the hiring and firing of professors, and all of the hiring at the university, including the cafeteria staff, the coaches, the building maintenance staff, everyone. A letter addressed to the constitutional clowns working for Donald Trump, who demanded that Harvard University surrender to Donald Trump, was co-signed by William A. Burke of the firm Quinn, Emanuel, Urquhart, and Sullivan, representing Harvard University. That lawyer's letter told the small Trump team minds trying to take over Harvard, quote, the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government. Harvard is not prepared to agree to demands that go beyond the lawful authority of this or any administration. The entire phony, utterly phony pretext for Donald Trump's attempts to make himself the president of Harvard University is that Donald Trump is now the country's leading crusader against anti-Semitism. In one of his first trips to Iowa as a presidential candidate, Donald Trump felt compelled to try to make it very clear to Iowa voters right away that he was not Jewish. Donald Trump assumed that if Iowa Republican voters thought that this New Yorker, this New York businessman, was Jewish, then he might have a big problem in Iowa. And so he's the only presidential candidate in history who took pains to point out that he's not Jewish. And of course, it was Donald Trump who had one of the accountants at one of his casinos fired because Donald Trump believed that that accountant was not Jewish. Donald Trump said then, quote, the only kind of people I want counting my money are short guys that wear yarmulkes every day. We know Donald Trump is unperturbed by anti-Semitism enough that he is the only president in history who has happily dined with a Holocaust denier and never apologized for that. Donald Trump had an intimate dinner at home in Florida with a Holocaust denier. And now Donald Trump wants to tell us and everyone else how to stop anti-Semitism. How about don't have dinner with Holocaust deniers? How about that? Donald Trump is the single worst investigator of anti-Semitism who has ever claimed to be investigating anti-Semitism. Donald Trump currently employs an acting U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., who he has nominated for Senate confirmation to become the U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C., who himself has happily praised a man who said, quote, Hitler should have finished the job. At the sentencing hearing of a January 6th defendant named Timothy Hale, federal prosecutors introduced evidence that he had said Hitler should have finished the job. And Ed Martin, who is now the head of the office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., the acting head that prosecuted all of the January 6th defendants, heaped praise on the man who said Hitler should have finished the job.
One guy is named Timothy Hale. Tim served 3+ years in prison based almost entirely on the 1512 fraudulent charge. In prison, he did the things that he'd done in his life before, which is he'd thought a lot and read a lot and been a writer and a thinker. He's the nephew of our own Cynthia Hughes, who's done so much for so many of us. But he's an extraordinary man, extraordinary leader now of those who have survived January 6th. And I think he's resisted this, but I don't care because I have the I bought this microphone, and I want him to come up and say at least a few minutes of thoughts, and have you encourage him with a round of applause. Timothy Hale. Tim?
With Donald Trump hauntingly and symbolically looking on in that portrait there beside the microphone, Donald Trump's choice to be the U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. invites, demands applause from the audience for the man who said Hitler should have finished the job. That's Donald Trump's team in action. Hitler should have finished the job. That man gets the full approval of the acting Trump U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., Ed Martin. And Donald Trump claims to be the chief investigator and preventer of anti-Semitism in America. Ed Martin knows Timothy Hale's case. He quoted Timothy Hale's case. He knows it. He must know. How could he not know that the federal prosecutors presented evidence that Timothy Hale said Hitler should have finished the job? Donald Trump's choice to be the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. praised the man who he had to know had said Hitler should have finished the job. That was part of the sentencing hearing in a sentence that Ed Martin thinks was unfair. Federal prosecutors presented that to the judge in that case, a case that Ed Martin claims to be an expert about. He's an expert about a case where the prosecutors said that the man Ed Martin thinks is a hero and should be praised by him and by the onlooking Trump portrait, that man who said Hitler should have finished the job. Ed Martin brought his legal expertise to that case of the man who said Hitler should have finished the job, and has decided that he was wrongfully convicted by that oppressive Justice Department that prosecuted all of those innocent people who were on their way on January 6th to try to kill the Vice President of the United States, among other violent ambitions they had that day, and screamed that day at the top of their lungs. Donald Trump's anti-Semitism police didn't find that guy. But Donald Trump's anti-Semitism police said that Donald Trump has to take over Harvard University because Harvard University has no idea how to deal with anti-Semitism the way Donald Trump does. Donald Trump wants Harvard University to fire anyone who condones anti-Semitism or expel any student who condones anti-Semitism. And Donald Trump employs and is trying to obtain Senate confirmation for a man who praised a convicted criminal who said Hitler should have finished the job. All of that information was available to Donald Trump before he chose Ed Martin to be his U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. All of it. And Donald Trump, the great anti-Semitism investigator, doesn't care about it. Donald Trump has not fired Ed Martin for praising that anti-Semite who you're looking at on your screen right now. That is the man who prosecutors said, has said, Hitler should have finished the job, and that is the man who Donald Trump's acting U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. was just praising on that video that you just saw. Ed Martin is now one of the fully disgraced attorneys who has been appointed by Donald Trump to the Justice Department, where some of them spend their days now trying to defend the mistake Donald Trump's gang deportation team made by deporting Kilmer Abrego Garcia who has been in this, who was in this country since he was 16 years old, has never been convicted of any crime in any country. Early in the proceedings, one Justice Department lawyer involved in the case admitted to the judge that it was what he called an administrative error to deport Mr. Abrego Garcia. And because that lawyer admitted that, that lawyer has now been fired from the Trump Justice Department. Since that lawyer was removed from the case, Judge Paula Zinas has been more than frustrated trying to get the Trump lawyers in the Trump Justice Department to do the minimally decent thing and the constitutional thing and correct their mistake and bring Mr. Abrego Garcia back to the United States from the proudly cruel prison in El Salvador, where most of the people sent there by Donald Trump have absolutely no evidence of any gang affiliations of any kind and no criminal records anywhere. In a hearing today, Judge Zinas said, to date, what the record shows is nothing has been done, nothing, meaning the Trump Justice Department has ignored her demands, supported by the Supreme Court, that they facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return to the United States. Today, the judge said something to the Trump Justice Department lawyers that most federal judges have never had to say to any lawyers. Quote, there will be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding. The judge said that yesterday's discussion, in the Oval Office about the case between Donald Trump and the president of El Salvador, who proudly proclaims himself to be a dictator, had no relevance to the proceedings in the case. She said that that scene in the Oval Office was, quote, two very misguided ships passing in the night. Just before today's hearing started, the Trump lawyers added this statement to the record of the case, quote, if Abrego Garcia does present at a port of entry, he would become subject to detention by Department of Homeland Security. In that case, Department of Homeland Security would take him into custody in the United States and either remove him to a third country or terminate his withholding of removal because of his membership in MS-13, a designated foreign terrorist organization, and remove him to El Salvador. So the Trump lawyers are now saying there is no point in trying to bring him back because if he's brought back, we will immediately send him back to El Salvador because he is a member of MS-13, even though there isn't the slightest bit of evidence that he's a member of any gang. Judge Zinas has noted that the evidence about this gang stuff, quote, consisted of nothing more than his Chicago Bulls hat and hoodie and a vague, uncorroborated allegation from a confidential informant claiming he belonged to MS-13's Western clique in New York, a place he has never lived. And once again today, Donald Trump made this case, the Abrego Garcia case, a case about all of us, about you, about me, about every American citizen, about every person in this country. Donald Trump is now saying that he eagerly wants to deport American citizens to El Salvador. And when he says that, he does not mention that those citizens must be formally convicted of a crime before he deports them. But let's just assume that he does want to send American citizens to a prison in El Salvador only after they've been convicted of a crime. That simply means if he snatched an American citizen off the street and sent that American to El Salvador, to a prison in El Salvador, without that citizen having been convicted of a crime, that would be what the Trump lawyers call an administrative error. And Donald Trump and his lawyers are saying in court that the administrative error can never be fixed because once they've sent someone to that El Salvador prison, there is nothing they can do to get that person out of that El Salvador prison, even though the gangster-style president of El Salvador was in the Oval Office, sucking up to his new friend Donald Trump in every way he possibly could, posting pictures, calling Donald Trump my friend. And so obviously, the president of El Salvador will do anything for his friend, the president of the United States, including helping to return Mr. Abrego Garcia or anyone else. So as it stands tonight, we live in a country where the President of the United States and his lawyers are insisting in court that the President can snatch anyone in America out of their car while their child is in the back seat, as was the case for Mr. Abrego Garcia, put that person on a plane to El Salvador, locking that person up in a prison in El Salvador, and if it turns out that that person's an American citizen who has never committed a crime anywhere in the world, then that's just an administrative error, and it cannot be fixed. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor said in the unanimous Supreme Court opinion ordering the Trump administration to facilitate the release of Mr. Abrego Garcia, quote, the implication of the government's position is that not only non-citizens, but also United States citizens can be taken off the streets, forced onto planes, and confined to foreign prisons with no opportunity for redress, meaning forever. As of tonight, those are the conditions we are all living in the United States. As Justice Sotomayor said, quote, not only non-citizens, but also United States citizens can be taken off the streets, forced onto planes, and confined to foreign prisons with no opportunity for redress. Donald Trump said they can put you in prison for the rest of your life. And once they get you there, there's nothing that you or any lawyer or any judge or anyone anywhere in the world, including the United States Supreme Court, can ever do to get you out of that prison. And you don't have to take my word for it, because those are the words of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who thought she grew up in a country where that could never happen. Leading off our discussion tonight is Andrew Weissman, former FBI General Counsel and former Chief of the Criminal Division in the Eastern District of New York. He's also an MSNBC legal analyst. Andrew, we just got the transcript of this proceeding today in the courtroom, and it's one of those Trump-era court transcripts that has passages and turns that I've never seen before.
So, you don't have to just take it to your comment to Justice Sotomayor. That is the position of the government in court, in black and white, in that transcript. Let me just give you some examples of what we are reading. First, in the quote that you had where the government submitted that there's no point essentially in bringing him back because we're just going to remove him again, they left out something. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled last week that the government has been violating due process, and they're required to give due process to anybody who is sought to be removed, United States citizen or not. There has to be due process. They have a right to a court hearing. So the government can try to do all of that, but a court is going to be involved, and the person has an opportunity to challenge the law and the facts. That was conveniently left out of the submission by the government to the court today. Second, the order from the Supreme Court was to facilitate the release of Mr. Abrego Garcia, who sits in jail as we speak because of the government's wrongful actions. They were supposed to facilitate the release. The government's position is what that means. Facilitate the release. The Supreme Court order means that if Mr. Abrego Garcia manages to escape from prison and present himself to the United States at a port of entry, then, only then, does the government have an obligation under the Supreme Court ruling to accept him and to do something to have him enter the country. That is their interpretation of what it means when the Supreme Court said facilitate his release, which is preposterous. And finally, today, the government said that the court has no ability to get the answer to the following question. Have you, the United States, even asked El Salvador for Mr. Garcia to be returned? Have you even asked? Their view is That's not something the court can even require. I mean, this is truly outlandish. It is exactly what you said, which is if you are removed to a foreign country, the government's position is that they can wash their hands of it, even if they violated due process in doing that.
I just want to read from the judge's order that she issued at the end of the proceedings tonight and how they proceed from here, which includes getting some under oath testimony from Trump administration officials. She said that the government appears to have done nothing to aid in Abrego Garcia's release from custody and return to the United States to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been, but for the defendant's wrongful expulsion of him. Thus, defendants attempt to skirt this issue by redefining facilitate runs contrary to law and logic. And in what the judge was saying there, she was quoting the Supreme Court language on this, but it's all turning for the Trump lawyers on what does the word facilitate mean in this case?
That is true, but this is just Alice in Wonderland. I mean, they're basically just saying, I mean, reminds me of the president saying January 6th is a wonderful day and nothing bad happened. I mean, they're just taking black and white language in the Supreme Court and saying it means something that it clearly doesn't. The district court is not having any of it. She has ordered discovery to be taken very quickly. But again, just remember, because this is all the intransigence and the callousness of our government, that we have somebody who is sitting in jail in violation of his rights, and he's still going to be there while this discovery proceeding happens because the government is not willing to be just fundamentally decent.
Andrew Weissman, thank you very much for starting off our discussions tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you. The discussion we've all been waiting for, Harvard Constitution. Today, President Barack Obama, who graduated from Harvard Law School in 1991, wrote, Harvard has set an example for other higher ed institutions, rejecting an unlawful and ham-handed attempt to stifle academic freedom while taking concrete steps to make sure all students at Harvard can benefit from an environment of intellectual inquiry, rigorous debate, and mutual respect. Let's hope other institutions follow suit. In Donald Trump's latest burst of constitutional dementia, Donald Trump said today, quote, perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity if it keeps pushing political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired supporting sickness. Sorry, Donald, tax law is written by the Congress alone, and a majority of the Senate and the House will never vote to revoke the tax status of America's universities. Joining us now is Professor Lawrence Tribe, who has taught constitutional law at Harvard Law School for 5 decades. And Professor Tribe, I just want to begin by reading one of your social media posts about this. You said Harvard will not comply with the Trump administration's demands to alter its truth-seeking mission or its commitment to fairness. I'm proud of Harvard and its leaders. This is the moment to max out in giving to Harvard to fill the gap Trump will create. I've heard others say that about contributing to Harvard these days. And one of the interesting developments from this program last night was that on our social media, after we covered it here on the show, there were people with no affiliation to Harvard whatsoever who were saying they were going to make contributions to Harvard, $10, $100, something, but sending in those contributions because they were so grateful for what Harvard has done.
Well, I'm grateful, too. I was worried that Harvard would ultimately compromise with Donald Trump the way a number of universities have. But when Stephen Miller, whose hand I detect behind the letter that Harvard received on Friday night, when he wrote what was essentially pornography in the form of, you will teach what we want. You will tell the students how to behave. You will tell the faculty how to behave. At that point, it was clear that Harvard, to be a self-respecting institution, really had no choice. And I wasn't intending to make kind of a financial pitch for Harvard. The real point was that unless we stand together, unless we are in solidarity with one another, unless we come to the aid of any institution, rich or poor, any individual, citizen or non-citizen, who is either whisked away or muzzled or essentially taken over by the would-be dictator, then we are lost. We either hang together, as Abraham Lincoln famously said, or we hang separately. It seems to me that what you just talked about with respect to Harvard is really not unrelated to what you talked about with respect to Mr. Garcia. The question really is, will we stand up to these extraordinary, blatant abuses of power, these defiances of judicial decrees? You name it, if it's a way of violating the Constitution in order to assuage Trump's ego, he will do it. And he's threatened to do it, and he carries out his threats. The real question is, will we stand up? And right now, the biggest question is, will the U.S. Supreme Court stand up? Because it is obvious. You don't even have to be as sophisticated as Andrew Weinstein. The fact is, nobody could doubt that the Trump administration is stiffing the courts. They're playing cat and mouse with them. There's no sense in which they are complying. And when this case gets back up to the U.S. Supreme Court, the question is, will the court back down? Will it find some fuzzy way of saying, well, he didn't exactly fail to comply. He didn't exactly defy the courts. Will they do that to protect themselves from a situation in which they don't have an army to enforce their decrees? Or will they stand up? Will the Chief Justice and Amy Coney Barrett, those are the two who are needed to join the three liberals in order to make the court essentially tell it like it is. Donald Trump has violated the decrees of the federal judiciary. He has committed any number of constitutional offenses. He has waged war on the United States, which is a form of treason. Will they have the spine to do that, knowing that they may, in the end, not be able to do anything concrete? Or will they bend over and play dead the way so many law firms and so many institutions have done? I hope that John Roberts, who was one of my students at Harvard Law School, will be as courageous as Barack Obama has been, another of my students. You know, you teach at a place like Harvard or any other place, and you have thousands of students, and you hope that you will give them some moral strength in addition to teaching them the details of law and the history of the country. Some of them have what it takes in terms of character, but some just don't. And this is a time of testing for all of us. We are at a profound crossroads in the history of the United States. We have a president who does not give a whit about the law or the Constitution, or about the harm that he imposes on individual human beings. We forget, you know, that the prison in El Salvador, where Abrego Garcia was tossed, is not any old prison. It's a torture chamber. It is a penal camp. It is a place where people are worked to death. It is a place from which people never emerge. Did you get that sense from Stephen Miller or from Donald Trump? They seem all too eager to take people, including what they call homegrown criminals, to take these people and toss them away like so much flotsam and jetsam. That is not who we are. We are a decent people, and we are a people who now have to stand up to the tyrant. I hope to heaven that everyone within the reach of your program's voice will do that and will recognize that it is now up to all of us not to give in to the tyrant.